Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and in this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 24 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates and we have a lot of changes on the ground, so let's start. But before we start, I would like to continue or maybe to finish the topic about the Korean forces. As you know, the Ukrainians are saying that the Russians are planning to begin using the Korean forces in the special military operation, trying to force the Western countries to be more dynamic in the making decisions, much faster in making decisions to supply and support Ukraine with additional weapon and of course with money. But I will give you my opinion. As I understand and according to my understanding of the situation, the Russians are going and are planning to use the Korean forces just on the territory of Sudzha region in the Kursk direction. Because from this perspective, the Russians and the Koreans will not break any international law if they use the foreign forces just on the territory of Russia. This is the Russia's right to ask any foreign countries to help them stabilize the situation and to restore territorial integrity along the border. They can ask to do this any country. But if the Russians with the Korean forces cross the border with Ukraine, this is going to be a very big breaking of international law. And from this moment, if Korean forces cross the border with Ukraine, the Koreans will be considered as aggressors with Russia. And of course, this will allow the Western countries to do the same, also to move their forces on the territory of Ukraine to fight with the Russians. So this is the reason why the Russians will use the Korean forces just in the Sudzha direction, and the Russians are not going to use the Korean forces on the territory of Crimea, Kherson, DPR, LPR or Zaporozhye, because according to international law, all these territories are considered and recognized by the Western countries as a part of Ukraine. So we will not see the Koreans in this part of the special military operation. The only place where we are going to see them, once again, is just the Sudzha and the Kursk directions. Now let's move and let's start from the, let's say, the South Donetsk direction. We have a lot of updates exactly from this part of the front line. According to information we have from neutral mappers, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their positions in the eastern part of the village of Katerinovka. But I'll remind you that yesterday the units of the 79th Brigade have already confirmed that the Ukrainians lost control over the settlement completely and that the entire settlement is already under the Russian control. So let's wait for additional updates. We will continue keeping the central and the western part of Katerinovka in the gray zone, and we will step by step color from the eastern to the western part of Katerinovka in Russian favor or into contested area based on the different mappers reports. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Kurakhove direction. We have significant changes on the ground, and the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the Nivolskaya pocket. We're talking about this area, and the Russians managed to secure the village of Zoriane and the village that used to have the name of Sofievka. And we have made these changes based on two things. First, the Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were after withdrawing the Russians and Russian forces on the territory of Sofievka. Based on this video, this part of Zoriane was colored in Russian favor. As for the central part of Zoriane, the changes were made based on the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation report. The Russians stated as a result of clashes, the group of forces south managed to take under control the village completely. And we have additional changes on the ground according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, and the pro-Ukrainians are saying that the Russians just managed to take under control the Nivolskaya pocket, and they're saying nothing about Zoriane. Just small eastern part of Zoriane, according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, is considered as a gray zone. The situation in Kurakhove is very difficult because the Russians are pushing, and this information also was confirmed by Deep State. Deep State reports on advancement of Russian armored forces deep into Gornyak. As for the map service itself, they're showing that the Russians have strong control just over the northern part of the settlement. But as for this report that was published by the soldiers on the ground, the Russians had deep advancement into the city of Gornyak. So this is the situation in this area. We also have some changes on the ground in the northern flank. This is the situation on the 19th of October, and this is the situation situation on the 20th of October. Just small updates on the flanks of Gornyak Kurakhove cauldron. Now let's talk about Selydove. We have very important updates. Some pro-Russian sources are saying that the first Russian groups, assault troopers, managed to reach the outskirts of the village of Verkhnyokamyanske, and furthermore the Russians managed to dig in deeper. So according to some pro-Russian sources, currently the Russians have already established complete control over this territory. If this information is correct, then this is the huge and the biggest disaster for the armed forces of Ukraine in the city of Selydove, because from the territory of Verkhnyokamyanske the Russians do have possibilities to control the last supply road from the south, and the distance is around 1.64 kilometers, and the Russians can control the same supply road from the northeast, and the distance in this case is around 1.62 kilometers, which is obviously confirms that the Ukrainians in Selydove caught in cauldron, and most likely they lost possibilities for evacuation. Furthermore, we have additional changes on the ground on the mine of Kurakhove. In this video that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, we can see several FPV drone attacks on Russian positions on the territory of this industrial complex and on these industrial facilities, and this is very important video that confirms additional Russian progress on the ground. I'll remind you that just a few days ago the Russians managed to take under control the most eastern part, and now the Russians managed to improve their positions further in the western direction. And just yesterday we were talking that there were published significant number of geolocations of FPV drone attacks and artillery attacks and FAB attacks to the west of the mine, and now the Russians began moving in the same direction. So this is the situation on the ground on the city of Selydove. Now let's move further. The Ukrainian sources are saying about unexpected attack in the direction of Vozdvizhenka. We have two icons. We have the confirmation from pro-Ukrainian mappers, and we have a very short video that was published by the Russian sources. In this video we can see the stronghold that located to the southeast of Vozdvizhenka, and we can see one small episode with the Russian flag on the territory of this stronghold. So the source reported that the Russians entered the village itself, but by the 20th of October the Russians just managed to take under control this huge stronghold and the farms. So this territory just was captured, and this is a perfect foothold before further advance in the direction of Vozdvizhenka. As for the city of Toretsk and the city of Chasiv Yar, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything special. We have small changes on the ground along MO3 road. The Ukrainians conducted several counterattacks, and as a result of counteroffensives the Ukrainians managed to restore control over some positions, and we have geolocations that confirm this, as you can see. So let's see what is going to be next, because this is very important direction. If the Russians ever decide to attack the city of Siversk, they need to advance along MO3 road. So that's why maybe the Ukrainians understand the risk and the value of this foothold, and this is the reason why they conducted several counterattacks. Now let's move further, and we have additional updates from the northern Kupyansk direction. First, let's talk about the village of Verkhnyokamyanske. Around 2 or 3 weeks ago, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that the village of Verkhnyokamyanske was captured by the Russians, but most of the mappers still haven't updated their maps in Russian favor. They're showing that the Russians do have control just over some outskirts of the settlement, but today pro-Russian sources reported that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to answer the village of Steppe. So let's wait for additional updates, but if this information is correct, then the situation for the Ukrainians is becomes much worse in comparison with the previous period of time, because the main road, Gorodka-Barova, was cut by the Russians physically, and now the Russians can move in any directions along the main supply road. Now let's talk about the most important area. Let's talk about the battle for the river of Askil. Today we have a lot of icons exactly from these pockets. We have a lot of changes on the ground, and we have a lot of confirmations from different mappers. This is the map that we can see on the pro-Ukrainian mappers. They're showing about additional progress to the river of Askil, but the progress is much less in comparison with the real data and geolocated data. We have also report from pro-Russian sources. Their map update is much closer to the reality, and we have the significant number of videos that were published by 92nd Mechanized Assault Brigade. Yes, currently they're Assault Brigade. So in this video we can see several FPV drone attacks on the huge Russian convoys. For example, just in this episode we can count up to 7 vehicles that were heading towards the northern part of the village of Kruhliaivka. The Ukrainians sent a significant number of FPV drones to slow down the Russians. As you can see, several vehicles and personal carriers were destroyed. Some of them were damaged, but the Russians managed to answer the village itself. This is very important. For example, saying that shows the Russian presence on the territory of Kruhliaivka itself. And based on these episodes, based on this video, most of the mappers have adjusted their maps in Russian favor, including just the northern part. So this territory was colored. A bit later we got another video published by pro-Ukrainian sources and published by pro-Russian sources, my bad. And in this video we can see another Russian attack in the direction of Kruhliaivka, and as a result of clashes the Russians managed to improve their positions in the northern farms. So basically the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt to answer the village with a significant number of forces. Most likely currently we can see the process of the concentration of critical mass before further progress on the ground. And now the Russians can attack in any direction, including in the western directions towards the village of Selydove. The Russians can attack in the southern directions towards the village and the town of Borova, and we just 5 minutes ago we were talking about additional advancement. And the Russians can of course begin moving in the northern direction with the purpose to take under control the city of Kursk that the Russians lost as a result of Ukrainian counteroffensive in 2022. As for the original Kursk direction, we have another map update. According to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians managed to take under control this part of the forest to the west of Sinkovka. This is the situation on the 19th of October, and this is the situation on the 20th of October. So the Russians are pushing, the Ukrainians are losing the ground, are losing manpower and forces, and now more and more sources are saying that Ukrainians are planning to reduce the mobilization age till 18 years. And of course this will allow them to mobilize another 500,000 soldiers, but most likely this will give the Ukrainians just a bit more time, maybe 1 year, but most likely this will not allow the Ukrainians to stop the Russians and to restore control over the borders of 1991. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.